A very good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, ladies, gentlemen, boys, and girls, and welcome to another episode on the Life Signatures Radio. This is a daily show, a daily podcast that is teaching, motivating, inspiring, and focusing on the subjects of purpose, productivity, and resilience. It is a virtual incubator for those three subjects. If this is the very first time that you're tuned on to the show, this is daily. It happens daily, and therefore you might need maybe to go back a little bit in order to get into the subject matter of what we're discussing right now. We're talking about self-sabotage in the terms of blockades that we put upon our lives consciously or unconsciously, and then they operate with that as knowing, or sometimes with us knowing, and they become blockades to our best possible outcomes. That's what we're talking about in the past 10 or so episodes, and we're going to continue talking about that. In the episode yesterday, we started looking at what are the areas of our personal blockades, and the first one that we talked about is the area of the mind. We're going to continue talking about that today. Stay tuned.
Welcome to the Life Signatures podcast with Lawrence Namale. Lawrence is a life coach, author, and keynote speaker who loves to tackle different topics on purpose, productivity, and resilience. His mission in life is to awaken all your boundless possibilities available in you. Life Signatures podcast is dedicated to bring to reality every single person who knows that deep down in their gut, there's got to be more to life than this. And now, here is your host, Lawrence Namale.
So the area of the mind is one of those areas that can easily prop up a blockade where there is a mental assent to your limitations. You agree in the mind that it is impossible, even though it is not. And you agree in the mind that it is not possible for this to happen to me. It's not possible for this to turn around. It's not possible for this to grow. It's not possible for me to live here. It's not possible for me to have this. Not possible for me to become this. If it is locked in the mind, lock, stock, and barrel, there is no way you are succeeding. It's a mental blockade. And we talked about that at length in the past 2 or so episodes. And now, yesterday we started talking about how exactly are you going to get out of a mental blockade. And the first thing we talked about was you should be okay with losing, because sometimes the blockade is just some kind of ego or some kind of fear. We have a fear that if I do, I will lose, I will fail, I'll be embarrassed, I'll be ashamed. And therefore we don't venture because we want to stay comfortable. We don't want to lose, we don't want to feel the embarrassment, we don't want to feel the loss, we don't want to feel the shame, and therefore we become safe in our blockade that says, if I try, I might. And therefore we don't. So that's the first thing we need to conquer. How do you conquer? You just settle it down that I might lose, I might be ashamed, I might be embarrassed, and pay the price right now mentally that it is okay for me to lose, it's okay for me to be embarrassed, it's okay for me to be ashamed, but it is not okay for me not to try. So that's the first thing. The second thing, we've got to learn to try to train, prepare and train our minds. There is such a thing. I think I quoted Brian Tracy yesterday or the other day. Brian Tracy said that most of these skills are learnable. We are not born with very many skills, and of course, things to do with mental training or mental toughness. Sometimes we're not born with it. Some of these things are not hereditary. We've got to learn. And if there is a mental blockade, Especially if we can identify that there is, of course, we've gone through different ways on which you can identify. You've got to now start training that particular mind. Train your mind to be tough. Question your mind instead of accepting everything that is telling you hook, line, and sinker. Be the guy who will be your own self-critic, and not someone who bashes yourself up and you're not going to succeed. No, someone who just says, hey, but Lawrence, wait a minute. What is that he just said? Is that really true? Is that even necessarily true? You get, as in you second guess in a good way. And you do this by being intentional about it. And this is the height of being objective. Because sometimes the things we accept are very subjective. And let me just use the analogy or the example of politics. If you go to your social media handle and you're always praising the person that you supported, always, there is nothing they can ever do wrong. And then you're always criticizing the person that is the opponent of whoever you supported. There is nothing right they can ever do. Guess what? You are not objective. You are not objective. That mind of yours is subjective. It is leaning on to one side. And the point is that if there is a blockade, the point is that you might not consider another option. That's what I'm telling you right here. Instead of being subjective, instead of being far right, far left, left or right, be in the middle and be objective. Don't take sides. Take the side of the truth. Let the truth reign, even if the Bible tells us in the book of I think Psalms 5 or Psalms 15, it says that the guy who will ascend the holy hill is the guy who honors his whatever, even if honors his promise, even if it is to his heart. Doesn't lean to the right, doesn't lean to the left. Accepts the truth even if it pains. And sometimes some of these truths are related to these mental blockades that we might be having. We might be leaning on the fact that we cannot, and the truth is that we can. So what am I telling you? I'm telling us to question some of these mental dispositions that we've already had. Tell your mind things instead of, keeping quiet when the mind is shouting at you and saying it's impossible. Don't accept it. Instead of us just being a receptor, our mind just being, we're just receiving whatever it is that is coming on our mind. No, we've got to be a prompter also. We've got to learn to speak back. I say no. It's a time I was holed up in the Rift Valley in Kenya, and my life was basically in a limbo. My father had been transferred by his church as a pastor to a particular place where there was basically no hope for how I'm going to continue with my studies. I was in the second year of doing my diploma in management information systems. And he didn't have money, my mama didn't have money. It seemed like my life had come to a halt, hook, line, and sinker, as in, if whatever I think there was no option. Basically, I was hemmed in and out. There was basically no option. And something kept coming to my mind that this is it, bro. It's done for you. And I kept saying no. I went and locked myself in prayer and will pray and pray and pray. Immediately I get out of the prayer room, the suggestion will come back to my mind, bro, it's done, it's dusted. You will not get out of this place. This is it. You are a failure. And I will say no. I will tell my mind, I will instruct my mind, I will say no, that is not it. And I will go back into the prayer room, lock the door and press in again. I refused. That's what I'm talking about. Sometimes we've got to refuse at the mental level. We've got to train our minds not to accept these things. You see, at all times your mind is always telling you something. At all times, it is always telling you something. At all times, whether that thing is coming from yourself, your mental disposition, whether it's coming from your culture, whether it's coming from the reality that you're experiencing at the moment, your mind is always telling you things. And these things are always sometimes going to be things that are contributing to the blockade inside of your mind. Here's the thing, not all these things in your mind that are being told are correct. Not all of them are correct. Some of them are very illusionary, very subjective to the situation, the context. Contexts are not copied and pasted to eternity. They change. They are fickle. Not all these things that your mind is telling you are correct, and perhaps you are not going to die. Perhaps you are not going to die poor. Perhaps you're not going to be a failure. Perhaps you're not going to be a pathetic lover. Perhaps you're not going to end up on the wrong side of the relationship. Perhaps you're not going down. Perhaps your company is not going down. Perhaps you're not being imprisoned. But your mind is telling you you're going to be imprisoned. Your company is going to go down. You will not amount to anything. And the biggest mistake we do is to shut up, to close our mouth when our mind is talking. Well, perhaps you will. But there is one thing. Ending up as a failure once does not mean that you can end up as a failure forever. The mind is just half right. Perhaps it is just half right. So teach to tell your mind and yourself some things. The worst we do when our mind is on a roll, telling us and giving us these blockades and these limitations, these impossibilities, is to keep quiet and, meditate. Meditate on the impossibilities. Meditate on the limitations. Meditate on the things that could not be. We think they could not be. We are not God. We don't know. But we are meditating. We are nodding our heads internally. We're saying, this is it. This is it. This is it. Let me just give you a personal one here. And as a teenager a long time ago, and I'm not that old anyway, but as a teenager, I used to have this attitude against my father. The mind would just set up a meeting. I kid you not. The mind would just set up a meeting, and he didn't even care to invite me to that particular meeting. And they will start discussing in a loud voice that I would not fail to hear that particular voice, not fail to hear that particular discussion. He will just continue and concocting things, how bad he is. And even if the things he hasn't done, the mind will just concoct those things and I will start meditating on, I will be invited to that meditation to think of how it is, even before it happens. And it will never happen, by the way, in a million years. And sometimes I'll find myself nodding and accepting and acknowledging. And it will give me a very bad mood. And I learned one thing as a teenager. I learned 2 words. And I keep telling myself, by the way, those 2 words even to date. These words are shut up. And sometimes those ones of you who have experienced me, you've heard me telling you the same thing. I use the word shut up, those 2 words shut up, just to counter. It's my mechanism, it's my automatic mechanism to counter something that I don't think I need to believe or I don't need to on board. I just say shut up. And I tell myself, by the way, shut up. And I've learned to interrupt my thought patterns by saying shut up. Just shut up. Just shut up. And in so doing, whatever blockade that was being beefed up, that was being propped up, in my mind, it is disorganized, it is confused. Its roots do not go deeper than they would have. Meditation on anything roots that meditation, roots that thing, by the way. It sends a deep taproot that establishes whatever it is that we are meditating on, and therefore it crops up or puts up this mental blockade. So what do we need to do? Number 2, we are saying that we need to learn to train our minds, and I'm going to talk about that again tomorrow in the episode tomorrow. But until then, bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to Life Signatures Radio. If you enjoyed today's show, subscribe to Life Signatures Radio on iTunes, Stitcher, or visit our website at lifesignatures.libsyn.com. Life Signatures Radio, fresh, clean, and inspiring.